The stagecoach rattled into Marfa, Texas, on a scorching afternoon in June of 1882, carrying a woman who had traveled halfway across the country with nothing but a carpetbag, a leather satchel, and a sleeping 4-year-old boy clutched against her chest. Florence Vaughn pressed her forehead against the dusty window, watching the dusty streets of her new home materialize through the heat waves shimmering off the desert floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she adjusted the weight of her son Samuel, who had finally drifted off after 3 days of restless travel. The advertisement had been simple enough. Rancher seeking wife. Must be hardworking, honest, and willing to relocate to West Texas. She had responded with equal simplicity, mentioning only that she was a widow, 24 years old, capable with cooking and mending, and possessed of a strong constitution. What she had not mentioned was Samuel. The omission had kept her awake every night since she had posted the letter. Yates Crawford had written back within 2 weeks, his penmanship neat and careful, saying he would send money for her passage from St. Louis and would meet her at the stage depot in Marfa on the 15th of June. He had described himself as 31 years old, owner of a cattle ranch 10 miles outside of town, and unaccustomed to eloquent words. He had signed the letter simply with his name, no flourishes or false sentiments. Florence had read that letter so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases. She had tried to imagine the man behind those sparse words, wondered if he was kind or merely practical, whether he would be gentle with Samuel or see her son as an unwelcome burden. But circumstances had left her few choices. Her husband had died 2 years ago in a factory accident, leaving her with debts she could never hope to repay on a seamstress's wages. Her landlord had grown increasingly insistent about the back rent, and her sister, who had taken them in after the funeral, was expecting her 4th child and could barely feed the mouths she already had. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and the driver's gruff voice called out their arrival. Florence took a deep breath, smoothed down her traveling dress as best she could with one hand, and gathered her courage along with her belongings. Samuel stirred against her shoulder, his dark eyes fluttering open. "Are we there, Mama?" His voice was small and sleepy, still carrying the slight lisp of early childhood. "Yes, sweetheart. This is Marfa. This is our new home." She tried to make her voice sound confident, certain, though her stomach churned with anxiety. The driver opened the door and helped her down, his weathered face showing neither judgment nor particular interest as he handed down her carpetbag. The afternoon sun hit her like a physical weight, so different from the humid heat of Missouri summers. This was a dry, relentless heat that seemed to pull the moisture from her skin within moments. Florence set Samuel on his feet and looked around the dusty Main Street. A handful of buildings lined the road, their wooden facades bleached pale by the constant sun. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small hotel, and a building with a sign proclaiming it the marshal's office. A few people moved along the covered boardwalks, seeking shade where they could find it. Horses stood tied to hitching posts, their tails swishing lazily at flies. And there, leaning against a post near the stage office, stood a man who had to be Yates Crawford. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their days in hard physical labor, with shoulders broad enough to fill out his simple cotton shirt. His face was tanned and angular, shadowed by the brim of a brown hat that had seen better days. Dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and even from this distance, Florence could see the cautious assessment in his eyes as he straightened and walked toward her. Those eyes, she noticed as he drew closer, were a striking shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over distant mountains. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked unaccustomed to smiling. There was a wariness about him, a kind of careful reserve that spoke of someone who had learned to guard himself against disappointment. Yates Crawford stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from Florence to the boy at her side, then back to her face. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Florence felt Samuel press closer to her skirts, intimidated by this strange man in this strange place. Florence Vaughn. His voice was deeper than she had expected, rough around the edges but not unkind. Yes, and you must be Mr. Crawford. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly despite her racing heart. This is my son, Samuel. I should have mentioned him in my letters. I apologize for the omission. If you find this arrangement no longer suitable, I understand, but I would appreciate if you could direct me to respectable lodgings where we might stay until I can find employment. She had practiced this speech during the long journey, had tried to prepare herself for rejection, for anger, for being sent away. What she had not prepared for was the way Yates Crawford's expression softened as he looked down at Samuel, or the way a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his entire countenance. "Well now," he said, crouching down so he was at eye level with the boy. "A son is a mighty fine thing to have. What do you say, Samuel? You think you might like living on a ranch? We have horses and cattle, and a creek that runs through the property where the water's cool even in summer." Samuel looked up at Florence, seeking permission to respond. She nodded, and he turned back to Yates with cautious interest. "Real horses, the realest kind. I have a mare named Clementine who is gentle as a lamb. She might let you brush her if you ask politely." Yates straightened and looked at Florence, and there was something warm in his eyes now, something that made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. "Seems to me I just got 2 reasons to smile instead of 1. Welcome to Marfa, Florence. Let me get your things loaded into the wagon." The relief that flooded through Florence was so intense she felt momentarily dizzy. She had braced herself for rejection, for anger, for having to start over yet again in an unfamiliar place with no resources and no prospects. Instead, this man, this stranger who owed her nothing, had accepted not just her but her son, had smiled at them both like they were gifts rather than burdens. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "You do not know what this means to us." Yates picked up her carpet bag and satchel with easy strength. "I think I might have some idea. Come on, the wagon is just over here. It is a bit of a ride out to the ranch, but we should make it before dark if we leave now." The wagon was sturdy and practical, pulled by 2 draft horses that stood patiently in the shade. Yates helped Florence up onto the bench seat, his hands careful and respectful, then lifted Samuel up beside her. The boy's eyes were wide as he looked at the horses, clearly fascinated despite his shyness. As Yates climbed up and took the reins, Florence allowed herself to really look at him in profile. There were lines around his eyes, marks of squinting into the sun during long days outdoors. His hands on the reins were strong and capable, with calluses that spoke of hard work. He wore simple clothes, clean but well worn, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that put her somewhat at ease. "I should tell you about the ranch," Yates said as they started moving, the wagon wheels crunching over the hard, packed dirt road. "It is not much, but it is mine. Bought it 5 years ago with money I saved working cattle drives up to Kansas. The house is small, just 3 rooms, but it is solid. I built it myself, so I know every board and nail is sound. I run about 200 head of cattle, have a few horses, some chickens. There is a Mexican family, the Rodriguezes, who have a place about 2 miles south. Rosa Rodriguez sometimes comes by to trade eggs for beef. They are good people." Florence listened, trying to absorb all this information, to build a picture in her mind of the place that would be her new home. Do you have any help with the ranch? I hire on a couple of hands during roundup and branding, but mostly I manage on my own. It keeps me busy." He glanced at her, his expression serious. "I want to be honest with you about what life will be like. It is not easy out here. The work is hard, the weather can be brutal, and we are a fair distance from town. There will be long days when I am out with the cattle from dawn until dusk. I need a wife who can handle herself, who will not wilt at the first sign of hardship." "I am no stranger to hardship, Mr. Crawford," Florence said quietly. "I have worked since I was 12 years old. I can cook, clean, mend, tend a garden, and manage a household budget with precision. I do not expect ease or luxury. I expect only honesty and respect. Then we should get along just fine, and you can call me Yates. I think we are past formalities, considering we are supposed to be married." "Speaking of which," Florence said, feeling her cheeks warm, "when did you intend for the ceremony to take place?" "I figured we would go to the minister tomorrow, if that suits you. Give you a night to settle in, make sure you still want to go through with it after you have seen the place." There was something vulnerable in his voice, a hint of uncertainty that made him seem more human, less intimidating. "That sounds reasonable." Florence paused, then added, "I want you to know that I will be a good wife to you, Yates. I will work hard and do my part. And Samuel is a good boy, well-behaved. He will not be a trouble to you." Yates was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. The landscape around them was vast and open, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted mesquite tree. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the afternoon heat. "I do not see the boy as a trouble. I see him as a blessing. I was an only child, and my parents died of fever when I was 19. I have been alone since then. The thought of having a family, even a ready-made one, well, it means more to me than I can rightly express." Something in Florence's chest loosened at his words. She reached down and smoothed Samuel's hair, feeling a rush of gratitude toward this strange man who had welcomed them both without hesitation. "Then we are fortunate to have found each other." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves, the creak of the wagon, and the occasional cry of a bird overhead. Samuel's head began to droop against Florence's arm, the exhaustion of travel finally catching up with him again. "He is worn out," Yates observed. "It is a long journey from Missouri, especially for one so small. How old is he?" "4. His birthday was last month." Florence looked down at her son's sleeping face, feeling the familiar fierce protectiveness that motherhood had awakened in her. "His father never got to meet him. He died before Samuel was born. I am sorry for your loss." Yates's voice was sincere. "It cannot have been easy raising a child on your own. It was not, but he is worth every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment of worry." Florence took a breath. "I want you to understand that Samuel will always be my first priority. I will be a good wife to you, but I am a mother first and foremost, as it should be." Yates nodded approvingly. "A woman who does not put her child first is not much of a mother. I respect that about you, Florence. In fact, I admire it." The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when they finally turned off the main road onto a narrower track that led through a shallow valley. Florence could see a creek glinting in the golden light, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome spots of green in the brown landscape. Cattle grazed in the distance, their forms solid and peaceful against the vast sky. And there, nestled in a small hollow with the creek running nearby, was a house. It was indeed small, built of wood that had weathered to a soft gray, with a covered porch across the front and a stone chimney rising from one side. There was a barn set back from the house, a chicken coop and several corrals. It was simple and rough, but there was something appealing about it, something honest and real. "This is it," Yates said, and Florence could hear a note of pride in his voice. "The Circle C Ranch. Not much to look at, but it is home." "It is lovely," Florence said, and she meant it. After months of uncertainty, of moving from one temporary situation to another, the sight of this solid, permanent dwelling filled her with a hope she had almost forgotten how to feel. Yates pulled the wagon up near the house and set the brake. He climbed down and came around to help Florence, his hands careful at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. Samuel woke with a start, momentarily confused, then relaxed when he saw his mother. "Come on, let me show you inside." Yates carried their bags while Florence followed with Samuel's hand in hers. The interior of the house was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. They entered directly into the main room, which served as both kitchen and living area. There was a cook stove against one wall, a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs, a cupboard for dishes, and a pair of comfortable-looking chairs near the stone fireplace. Everything was clean but sparse, the home of a man who lived alone and kept things simple. "The bedroom is through there," Yates said, gesturing to a door on the right. "I will bed down out here for now, give you and the boy some privacy until after we are properly married. There is a small room off the back that I use for storage, but we could clear it out, make it a room for Samuel eventually if you like." Florence felt tears prick at her eyes at his thoughtfulness. "That is very kind of you." There is a well outside with good water and an outhouse behind the barn, not fancy but serviceable. Yates set down the bags and rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly seeming uncertain. "I know it is not what you might be used to." "It is perfect," Florence said firmly. "Thank you, Yates, for all of this, for accepting us both." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them, a recognition of mutual need and mutual relief, the first fragile threads of connection between two lonely people seeking refuge in each other. The moment was broken by Samuel tugging on Florence's skirt. "Mama, I am hungry." Yates smiled. "Well, we can fix that. I have beans and salt pork, some cornmeal, not fancy fare but filling." "Let me cook," Florence said quickly. "You have been driving all afternoon. It is the least I can do." "I would not say no to a home-cooked meal. It has been a long time since anyone but me has used that stove." Yates showed her where he kept his supplies, which were surprisingly well organized for a bachelor. There was a good supply of staples: flour, cornmeal, beans, rice, salt, sugar, and coffee. A few tins of peaches and tomatoes. Hanging from hooks in the ceiling were bunches of dried peppers and herbs. Florence set to work with the efficiency of long practice, her hands moving automatically through familiar tasks, while her mind tried to process the enormousness of the change in her circumstances. Just this morning, she had woken on a hard stagecoach bench, uncertain of her future, terrified of rejection. Now here she was in a house that would soon be her home, cooking for a man who would soon be her husband, watching Samuel explore his new surroundings with cautious curiosity. Yates busied himself with small tasks, bringing in wood for the stove, filling a bucket with fresh water from the well, lighting the lamps as the daylight faded. He moved with the easy competence of someone comfortable in his space, but Florence noticed he kept glancing at her and Samuel, as if reassuring himself they were really there. Dinner was simple but satisfying. They ate at the rough table while the last light drained from the sky outside and the first stars began to appear. Samuel, overwhelmed by the day's events, ate only a few bites before his eyes began to close again. "Let me put him to bed," Florence said, rising from the table. Yates showed her to the bedroom, which contained a sturdy double bed covered with a handmade quilt, a small dresser, and little else. The room was spotlessly clean, and Florence felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought that in a few days she would be sharing this bed with the man currently standing in the doorway. She settled Samuel on one side of the bed, removing his shoes and loosening his collar but not bothering to change his clothes. He was asleep before she pulled the quilt over him, his small face peaceful in the lamplight. When she returned to the main room, Yates had cleared the dishes and was adding wood to the fire, even though the evening was still warm. Perhaps he needed something to do with his hands, some activity to ease the awkwardness of this strange situation they found themselves in. "He went right out," Florence said, taking a seat in one of the chairs near the fireplace. "It has been a long day for all of you." Yates settled into the other chair, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a while they sat in silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the night sounds drifting through the open window. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere far off, a coyote howled. "Can I ask what happened to your husband?" Yates's voice was quiet, tentative. "If you would rather not speak of it, I understand." Florence clasped her hands in her lap. "His name was Thomas. He worked in a textile factory in St. Louis. There was an accident with one of the machines. He died instantly, or so they told me. I was 7 months pregnant at the time." The old pain was still there, but dulled now by time and necessity. "We had only been married a year. He was a good man, but we were very young when we married. I was 17, he was 19. We did not really know what we were getting into. But you loved him." "I did." Not in the passionate way of stories, perhaps, but in a comfortable, friendly way. "He was kind to me, and we were happy enough." Florence met Yates's eyes. "I want to be honest with you. I am not coming into this marriage with romantic notions. I am seeking security for myself and my son, a stable home and a decent man who will treat us well. If you are seeking a great love affair, I cannot promise you that." Yates leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I appreciate your honesty. Truth is, I am not looking for a great romance either. I am 31 years old and tired of being alone. I want a partner, someone to share the work and the quiet evenings. I want the sound of voices in this house instead of just my own. And maybe, if we are lucky, we will build something good together. Love can grow, I think, given time and care." "I think so too," Florence said softly. There was something deeply reassuring about his pragmatism, his lack of unrealistic expectations. They were two practical people entering into a practical arrangement, but there was kindness in it and respect, and that was more than many people had. "You should know," Yates continued, "that I am not always the easiest man to live with. I can be stubborn, and I am used to my own company. I am not good with fancy words or romantic gestures, but I am honest and I am loyal, and I will provide for you and Samuel to the best of my ability. I will never raise a hand to either of you in anger, and I will never betray your trust. That is my promise to you. That is all I ask." Florence felt the last of her anxiety begin to ease. Whatever else this marriage might be, it would be built on truth and mutual understanding. "I promise you the same. Honesty, loyalty, and respect. I will make this house a home, and I will be a true partner to you." They talked for another hour, sharing the basic facts of their lives, beginning the process of learning about each other. Florence told him about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 children, about learning to sew from her mother, and taking work as a seamstress when her family needed extra income. Yates spoke of growing up on a small farm in Kansas, of falling in love with cattle work as a teenager, of the years spent saving every penny to buy his own land. When the fire had burned down to embers and Florence could barely keep her eyes open, Yates stood and offered her his hand. "You need rest. Tomorrow will be a full day, and I imagine you are worn through." "I am," Florence admitted, accepting his help to rise from the chair. "Thank you, Yates, for everything." He held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his rough palm warm against hers. "No need for thanks. I am the grateful one here. Sleep well, Florence." That night, lying in the darkness with Samuel's soft breathing beside her, Florence stared at the unfamiliar ceiling and marveled at how much her life had changed in a single day. She thought about the man sleeping in the other room, about his kind eyes and gentle manner with Samuel, about the promise of a new beginning. For the first time in 2 years, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sun streaming through the bedroom window to wake Florence from the deepest sleep she had enjoyed in months. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to place the unfamiliar room. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, anxious about having overslept her first morning in her new home. Samuel was still asleep, curled into a tight ball beneath the quilt. Florence rose quickly, smoothing her hair and straightening her wrinkled dress, wishing she had thought to unpack afresh one last night. She opened the bedroom door quietly and stepped into the main room. Yates was already up, dressed in work clothes with his hat on, clearly preparing to head out for morning chores. He looked up as she entered and gave her a slight smile. "Morning. I was just about to head out to tend the animals. I left some coffee on the stove for you. Thank you." "I apologize for sleeping so late. That is not usually my habit. You needed the rest. There is no schedule you need to keep, Florence. Make yourself at home, explore the place. I will be back in a couple of hours, and then we can head into town to see the minister if you are still willing." "I am willing." Florence poured herself a cup of the strong black coffee, grateful for its warmth and the clarity it brought. Yates lingered by the door, his expression uncertain. "I am glad you are here," he said finally, simply, then slipped out into the morning before she could respond. Florence spent the morning exploring her new home, taking stock of supplies and making mental lists of what would be needed. The house was clean, but had the barren feel of a place inhabited by someone who saw it merely as shelter rather than home. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no personal touches beyond a few books on a shelf and a framed photograph of an elderly couple who must have been Yates's parents. Samuel woke and was full of questions, his earlier shyness fading in the light of day. Florence made them a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush with a bit of sugar stirred in, then took him outside to explore. The morning air was already warming, but it was pleasant in the shade of the cottonwood trees that lined the creek. Samuel was enchanted by the water, and Florence allowed him to wade in the shallows while she kept a careful watch. When Yates returned, he found them there, Samuel splashing in the creek while Florence sat on the bank with her skirts tucked around her legs. He stood watching them for a moment before speaking, and Florence caught a look of such naked longing on his face that it made her chest ache. How lonely he must have been, she thought, living out here all alone with no one to talk to, no one to care about his comings and goings. "Ready to head to town?" he called out. "Yes, just let me make Samuel presentable." Florence gathered her son from the creek, dried his feet with her apron, and got him into his shoes. Inside, she did her best to freshen up, unpacking a clean dress and taking a few minutes to fix her hair properly. When she emerged, she found Yates had also changed, wearing a clean shirt and his better hat. The ride into town was more relaxed than the previous day's journey. Samuel sat between them, chattering about the horses and asking endless questions that Yates answered with patient good humor. Florence found herself watching Yates's interactions with her son, noting the gentleness in his voice, the way he took Samuel's questions seriously instead of brushing them off. Marfa looked much the same as it had the day before, dusty and quiet in the midday heat. Yates pulled the wagon up in front of a small white building with a wooden cross above the door. "This is the church. Reverend Matthews has been the minister here for about 3 years. He is a good man, does not preach too much fire and brimstone." The Reverend turned out to be a thin, earnest man in his 40s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He showed no surprise at the hasty nature of the wedding, apparently accustomed to the practical arrangements common in frontier life. He did raise an eyebrow at Samuel's presence, but made no comment beyond asking if Florence was widowed. When she confirmed it, he nodded and asked them to wait while he fetched his wife to serve as a witness, Mrs. Matthews was a plump, cheerful woman who insisted on picking some flowers from her garden to make a small bouquet for Florence. "Every bride should have flowers," she declared, pressing the bouquet of desert marigolds and bachelor buttons into Florence's hands. The ceremony itself was brief and simple. They stood in the small sanctuary, the wooden pews empty except for Samuel, who sat in the front row swinging his legs and watching with wide eyes. Reverend Matthews read the traditional words, and Florence listened to herself making vows to this man she had known for barely 24 hours, promising to love, honor, and cherish him until death parted them. When Yates spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his gray-blue eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was a gravity to this moment that she had not expected, a weight of promises being made and lives being bound together. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews said with a smile. Yates hesitated, clearly uncertain, then leaned down and pressed a chaste, gentle kiss to Florence's lips. It was over in a moment, but Florence felt the warmth of it linger, felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach that she told herself was merely nerves. They signed the marriage certificate, Yates's handwriting careful and precise, Florence's smaller and more decorative. Mrs. Matthews hugged them both and insisted they must come to dinner soon. Reverend Matthews shook Yates's hand and told Florence she was welcome to join the ladies' auxiliary if she wished. And just like that, Florence Vaughn became Florence Crawford. As they walked back to the wagon, Yates reached down and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. It was the first real gesture of affection between them, and Florence found it both strange and comforting. "Well, Mrs. Crawford," he said, and there was a hint of pleased satisfaction in his voice. "Shall we go home?" "Yes," Florence replied, squeezing his hand. "Let us go home." They stopped at the general store before leaving town so Florence could see what was available. The proprietor, a jovial man named Mr. Jenkins, congratulated them on their marriage and offered Florence credit on Yates's account. She selected fabric for curtains, thinking that would be a good first project to make the house feel more like home. She also purchased a small bag of peppermint sticks and gave one to Samuel, who accepted it with the grave politeness she had taught him. "Your boy has fine manners," Mr. Jenkins observed approvingly. "Thank you," Florence said, feeling a rush of pride. She glanced at Yates and found him watching Samuel with an expression of such tenderness that something in her chest tightened. On the ride back to the ranch, Samuel fell asleep again, his head pillowed on Yates's thigh, the peppermint stick still clutched in his sticky hand. Florence watched her new husband's large, calloused hand rest protectively on her son's small back and felt tears prick at her eyes. "You are very good with him," she said softly. Yates glanced down at the sleeping child. "He is easy to be good to. You have raised him well, Florence." "I have tried my best, but it has not been easy alone. You are not alone anymore." The simple statement carried a weight of promise that made Florence's throat tight with emotion. That evening, their first as a married couple, felt both strange and natural. Florence cooked dinner while Yates completed his evening chores. Then they sat together at the table like a real family. Samuel was full of energy despite his naps, excited about everything in this new place, and his chatter filled the house with the kind of life it had been lacking. After dinner, Yates took Samuel outside to show him the horses as promised. Florence watched from the window as her new husband lifted her son onto his shoulders to give him a better view into the stall where Clementine, a gentle bay mare, munched her evening hay. Samuel's delighted laughter rang out across the yard, and Yates's answering chuckle was deep and genuine. When they returned, Samuel was too excited to sleep, so Florence read to him from one of the few books in the house, a collection of frontier tales that Yates produced somewhat sheepishly. "Not exactly children's stories," he admitted, "but it is all I have." "They are fine," Florence assured him, settling into one of the chairs with Samuel on her lap. She edited as she read, softening the rougher parts, and Samuel was entranced. Yates sat in the other chair, ostensibly repairing a piece of tack but really just listening, his eyes distant and content. Finally, Samuel's eyes began to droop, and Florence carried him to bed. When she tucked him in, he looked up at her with his serious dark eyes. "Mama, do we get to stay here forever?" "Yes, sweetheart. This is our home now. I like Mr. Yates. Is he my papa now?" Florence's breath caught. She had not expected the question so soon. "He is my husband, which means he is your stepfather, but you can call him whatever feels right to you." "Can I call him Papa? If he says that is all right with him, then yes." Florence kissed Samuel's forehead. "Now sleep. We have all the time in the world to figure these things out." When she returned to the main room, Yates was banking the fire for the night. He looked up as she entered, and there was a question in his eyes. "Samuel wants to know if he can call you Papa," Florence said, deciding to address it directly. Yates straightened slowly, his expression unreadable. "What did you tell him?" "That he could if you were comfortable with it." For a long moment, Yates said nothing. Then he cleared his throat roughly. "I would be honored. I never thought I would have a son. I never thought I would have a family at all. If Samuel wants to call me Papa, that is more than I could have hoped for." The raw emotion in his voice brought tears to Florence's eyes. She crossed the room and, acting on impulse, reached up to cup his cheek. "You are a good man, Yates Crawford. I am grateful that Samuel will have you as an example of what a man should be." Yates covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. The gesture was tender and unexpected, sending a shiver through Florence that had nothing to do with the temperature. "I will do my best to deserve that faith." They stood there for a moment, something shifting between them, the practical arrangement beginning to take on shades of something deeper. Then Yates stepped back, clearing his throat. "I will continue to sleep out here for now," he said. "Give you time to adjust, to be sure about things." Florence wanted to tell him it was not necessary, that they were married now, and she understood what that meant, but part of her was grateful for his consideration. "Thank you for your patience." "We have time," Yates said, echoing her words to Samuel. "There is no need to rush anything." Florence retired to the bedroom, but sleep was slow to come. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Yates settling himself on the floor in the other room, thinking about the strange turns life took. A week ago, she could never have imagined this. Married to a man she had just met, living on a cattle ranch in West Texas, watching her son call a stranger Papa. Yet somehow, it felt right in a way she could not quite explain. There was a goodness in Yates, a fundamental decency that made her feel safe for the first time in years. The days settled into a rhythm. Florence rose early to make breakfast, seeing Yates off to his morning work. She spent her days cleaning and organizing, gradually putting her stamp on the house. She made curtains for the windows, colorful gingham that brightened the rooms considerably. She planted a small kitchen garden near the house, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn Texas soil. She explored the property with Samuel, learning the boundaries of their new world. Yates worked from dawn until dusk, caring for his cattle, mending fences, breaking horses. He came home each evening tired and dusty, but he always took time with Samuel before dinner, teaching the boy about ranch life with infinite patience. He showed Samuel how to collect eggs from the chickens without frightening them, how to brush the horses properly, how to identify different plants and which ones to avoid. Samuel followed him everywhere, chattering constantly, and Yates answered every question as if it were the most important thing in the world. Florence watched their relationship develop with a heart that felt too full. She had worried that Samuel would struggle with the transition, but her son was blossoming under Yates's attention. For the first time, Samuel had a father figure who was present and engaged, who taught him and played with him and made him feel valued. Within a week, Samuel was calling Yates Papa naturally, and the joy on Yates's face every time he heard it never diminished. But it was not just Samuel who was adjusting. Florence found herself growing increasingly comfortable with Yates, their initial awkwardness fading into an easy companionship. They talked during meals, sharing stories of their days. Yates told her about the ranch's history, his plans for expansion, the challenges of raising cattle in this harsh climate. Florence shared her own dreams, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she realized he genuinely listened and valued her opinions. 2 weeks after their wedding, Rosa Rodriguez came by with a basket of eggs and fresh tortillas. She was a warm, middle-aged woman with laugh lines around her eyes and a genuine smile. Her English was accented but fluent, and she welcomed Florence with enthusiasm. "It is so good to finally have another woman nearby," Rosa said, settling at the kitchen table while Florence made coffee. "I told my husband Yates needs a wife, that man is too much alone, and now here you are and with a son too. God is good." "It has been an adjustment," Florence admitted, "but a good one." Rosa's sharp eyes studied her. "You love him yet?" The directness of the question made Florence blink. "I care for him," she said carefully. "He is a good man and he has been very kind to Samuel and me, but you do not love him." Rosa nodded as if she had expected this answer. "Give it time. I have seen the way he looks at you like you are water in the desert. That man is already halfway in love whether he knows it or not. The rest will come." Florence felt her cheeks warm. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes the heart knows faster than the head." Rosa patted her hand. "Be patient with each other. Love built slowly is often the strongest kind." After Rosa left, Florence thought about her words. Did Yates look at her in a special way? She tried to recall specific moments, analyzing his expressions and gestures with new awareness. There had been small things. The way his eyes followed her when she moved around the room, how he always made sure her coffee cup was filled, the gentle way he had helped her over a rough patch of ground when they walked to the creek. Were these signs of growing affection, or merely the actions of a courteous man? That evening, she found herself studying Yates more openly. He sat near the fireplace, reading while Samuel played with a set of carved wooden animals Yates had surprised him with that morning. The lamplight cast shadows across Yates's face, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and cheekbone. He was a handsome man, she realized, though his appeal was not the obvious kind. It was in the capable way he moved, the steadiness in his eyes, the quiet confidence he carried. As if sensing her regard, Yates looked up and their eyes met. For a moment, neither looked away. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken things, questions and possibilities hovering just beyond words. Then Samuel dropped one of the wooden horses and the moment broke, but something had shifted, some acknowledgement passing between them. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Yates came to the bedroom door. Florence was brushing her hair, still dressed but preparing for bed, and she turned in surprise at his knock. "I wanted to talk to you," Yates said, remaining in the doorway, respecting the threshold. "If now is a good time." "Of course." Florence set down her brush, her heart beating a little faster. Yates shifted his weight, suddenly seeming uncertain. "I have been thinking. We have been married 2 weeks now, and you seem to have settled in well. Samuel is happy. The house feels like a home for the first time since I built it." "I am glad," Florence said softly. "The thing is, we are married in law and in the eyes of God, but we are still living like strangers. I am sleeping on the floor in the main room like a hired hand, and you are in here alone." He paused, his jaw working as if the words were difficult. "I want you to know that I am not expecting anything from you, but I would like to sleep in my own bed if you are comfortable with that. Just sleep. Nothing more until you are ready." Florence's mouth went dry. She had known this moment would come eventually. They could not maintain the current arrangement indefinitely, and he was her husband. She had no right to keep refusing him, especially when he had been nothing but patient and kind. "I think that would be fine," she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "This is your home, your bed. I should not have kept you from it. You have not kept me from anything I did not choose willingly." Yates took a step into the room, then stopped. "Florence, I want you to understand something. I desire you as a husband desires a wife. I would be lying if I said otherwise, but I will never force myself on you. When we come together as man and wife in truth, it will be because we both want it, not because I claim some marital right." The honesty in his words, the respect implied in them, loosened something in Florence's chest. "I appreciate that more than you know. So we are agreed. I will sleep in the bed on my side. You can keep to yours. We will take things slowly." "Yes," Florence nodded, then managed a small smile. "Though Samuel may be confused to find you here in the morning, we will explain it simply. That you and I are married, and married people sleep in the same bed." Yates returned her smile, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "I will go ready myself. Give you some privacy." When he returned a few minutes later, he wore only his undershirt and trousers, having removed his boots and outer shirt. Even this small degree of undress seemed intimate to Florence, who had grown accustomed to seeing him always fully clothed. He moved around the room with quiet efficiency, banking the lamp down to a low glow, checking that the window was properly latched. Florence had already climbed into bed, keeping as far to one side as possible. The bed was wide enough that there was a good expanse of space between them when Yates settled on the other side. He lay on his back, his hands folded on his chest, staring at the ceiling. "Good night, Florence," he said quietly. "Good night, Yates." The darkness settled around them. Florence was acutely aware of every sound. Yates's breathing, the rustle of fabric when he shifted position, the creak of the bed frame. She expected to lie awake for hours, too conscious of his presence to relax. But the truth was, having him there felt right in a way she had not anticipated. After years of sleeping alone or with only Samuel beside her, there was something comforting about the steady presence of an adult companion, someone strong and capable who stood between her and the vast darkness outside. She woke once in the night to find she had rolled toward the center of the bed in her sleep. Yates's back was to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. She could hear his deep, even breathing, the sound of someone sleeping peacefully. Carefully, she moved back to her side, but not before allowing herself a moment to appreciate the simple pleasure of not being alone. Morning came with Samuel's arrival, the boy stopping short in the doorway when he saw Yates in the bed. Yates woke immediately, always a light sleeper, and smiled at Samuel's confused expression. "It is all right, son. Your mama and I are married, remember? Married people share a bed." Samuel considered this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. "Are you going to show me how to rope a fence post today like you promised?" "I sure am, right after breakfast. Now go let your mama get dressed in peace." The days continued, each one adding another layer to the foundation they were building. Florence grew more efficient in managing the household, learning the quirks of the stove and the best ways to keep the dust at bay. She discovered she enjoyed the challenges of frontier life, the way each day brought new problems to solve and small triumphs to celebrate. Yates began including her more in ranch decisions, asking her opinion on everything from which cattle to sell to whether they should add more chickens. Florence appreciated being treated as a true partner, her thoughts valued and considered. Sometimes in the evenings, they would sit on the porch after Samuel was asleep, talking quietly while the stars wheeled overhead. It was during one of those evenings, about a month after their wedding, that things shifted between them again. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds, when Yates suddenly spoke. "I have been thinking about clearing out that storage room, making it proper sleeping quarters for Samuel. He is getting bigger, and it does not seem right for him to sleep in the same room with us indefinitely. That would be wonderful, though it seems like a lot of work. I will have time once we finish the spring branding. Might be nice to give him his own space." Yates paused. "And it might be nice for us to have more privacy." The implication hung in the air between them. Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks, but it was not entirely from embarrassment. Sharing a bed with Yates these past weeks had created an intimacy between them, though it remained chaste. She had grown accustomed to the warmth of his body beside her, to waking in the night sometimes to find they had unconsciously moved closer together in sleep. There had been moments of accidental touching, a hand brushing a shoulder, legs tangling briefly before being quickly separated, each instance sending sparks through her that she tried to ignore. "Yates," she said carefully, "are you saying that you want our marriage to be a true one in all ways?" "Only if you want it to." His voice was low, rough with something that might have been desire. "I will not lie to you, Florence. I want you. I have wanted you since the day you stepped off that stage. But more than that, I care for you. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you make this house a home, seeing you with Samuel, I find myself thinking that I am the luckiest man alive to have you as my wife." Florence's heart was beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I care for you too," she admitted. "More than I expected to. You have been so good to us, so patient and kind, and I would be lying if I said I had not thought about us becoming truly husband and wife." Yates turned to face her, his eyes searching hers in the darkness. "Then what are we waiting for?" "I suppose we are not waiting for anything at all." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "May I kiss you, Florence?" A real kiss this time, not the pale thing we exchanged in the church. "Yes," she whispered. Yates leaned in slowly, his eyes never leaving hers until the last moment when their lips met. This kiss was nothing like the brief, chaste brush of their wedding. This was deep and thorough, a claiming and a question all at once. His lips moved over hers with a skill that surprised her, coaxing a response she had not known she was capable of giving. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, steadying herself against the wave of sensation washing through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to be sure, Florence, once we take this step there is no going back." "I am sure," she said, and she meant it. Whatever this thing was growing between them, She wanted to explore it to see where it might lead. "I want to be your wife in truth, Yates." He stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. Together, they went inside, Yates pausing to check that Samuel was deeply asleep before leading Florence to their bedroom and closing the door softly behind them. What happened that night was tender and awkward and beautiful all at once. Yates was gentle with her, patient with her nervousness, taking his time to help her relax. He murmured reassurances and praise, his hands careful as they learned the shape of her, his voice rough with desire held carefully in check. When they finally came together, Florence felt a connection deeper than mere physical pleasure, though that was present too. She felt as if they were forging something real and lasting, turning their practical arrangement into something that resembled the genuine marriage she had never thought to have again. Afterward, Yates held her close, her head resting on his chest while his fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I am more than all right." Florence pressed a kiss to his chest. "I am happy, Yates, truly happy in a way I was not sure I would ever be again." She felt more than heard his satisfied rumble of contentment. "Good, that is all I want, Florence. To make you and Samuel happy, to build a good life together. I think we are well on our way to doing exactly that." They fell asleep tangled together, and Florence slept more soundly than she had in years, secure in the circle of her husband's arms. The next few months brought changes both subtle and significant. Yates kept his promise and converted the storage room into a small bedroom for Samuel, who was thrilled to have his own space. The boy helped paint the walls and chose where his bed should go, taking ownership of his new room with the seriousness of a much older child. With Samuel sleeping in his own room, Florence and Yates had the freedom to explore their growing passion for each other without worrying about being overheard or interrupted. Their physical relationship deepened and improved as they learned each other's preferences and rhythms. But more than that, their emotional connection strengthened. They talked late into many nights, sharing secrets and dreams, fears, and hopes. Florence told Yates about the poverty of her childhood, the constant worry about having enough to eat. Yates spoke of the loneliness of his years alone, the way the silence of the house had sometimes felt suffocating. "I used to think I was fine being alone," Yates admitted one night as they lay together. "I told myself I did not need anyone, that I was too set in my ways to share my life. But the truth is, I was just afraid of needing someone and losing them the way I lost my parents. It seemed safer to stay alone." Florence traced the line of his jaw with her finger. "What changed?" "I started thinking about growing old with no one to care if I lived or died. I thought about dying out here alone, my body not being found for days or weeks. It was a dark thought, and it made me realize that hiding from life was not the same as living it." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "And then you stepped off that stage, and I thought, here is my chance. My one shot at having something real. I was not about to let fear make me lose that." "I am so glad you did not." Florence kissed him softly. "I came here expecting only security, a roof over our heads and food on the table. I never imagined I would find this, that I could feel this way again." "What way?" "Loved," Florence said simply. "Cherished, like I matter to someone." "You matter to me more than anything in this world," Yates said fiercely. "You and Samuel both. You are my family now, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much I value that." As summer gave way to fall, the ranch thrived. The cattle were healthy, the prices at market were good, and Yates was able to purchase a few more head and even hire a permanent ranch hand, a young man named Tom who built himself a small cabin near the barn. The extra help meant Yates had more time to spend with his family, and he made the most of it. He taught Samuel to ride, putting the boy on gentle Clementine and leading them around the property. Samuel's fearless enthusiasm delighted Yates, and Florence often watched from the porch, her heart full at the sight of her husband and son together. Samuel worshipped Yates, following him everywhere, imitating his mannerisms, hanging on his every word. And Yates returned that devotion in full measure, patient and encouraging, proud of every small accomplishment. In October, Florence began to notice changes in her body. Her monthly courses, usually regular, failed to arrive. She felt queasy in the mornings and found herself craving strange combinations of food. She waited another week to be sure before mentioning anything to Yates. She chose a quiet evening when Samuel was already asleep and Tom had gone to his cabin for the night. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Yates had his arm around her shoulders and Florence leaned into his warmth, gathering her courage. "Yates, I need to tell you something." He tensed slightly, perhaps sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" "I think I am with our child." For a moment Yates did not move, did not even seem to breathe. Then he pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Florence tried to read his expression but could not. "Are you pleased?" Yates let out a shaky laugh and pulled her into a tight embrace. "Pleased? Florence, I am beyond pleased. I am astounded. I am grateful. I am terrified." He pressed his face into her hair. "A baby, our baby. I never thought I would have this." "So you are happy?" Florence's voice was muffled against his chest. "Happier than I have words to express." Yates pulled back enough to cup her face and kiss her thoroughly. "You have given me so much already, and now this. I do not know what I did to deserve such blessings, but I will spend every day trying to be worthy of them." "You already are," Florence assured him. "You are going to be a wonderful father, Yates. You already are with Samuel. That boy is easy to love. He came to me already perfect, thanks to you." Yates placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This little one, though, will be ours together from the start, a child of our marriage, our love." Florence covered his hand with hers. "Yes. A new beginning for us, a symbol of what we have built together." They sat for a long time, talking quietly about the future. Yates was full of plans. He would build on to the house, adding another bedroom and maybe expanding the kitchen. He would make sure Florence had everything she needed, that she did not work too hard. He insisted she must see the doctor in town regularly, that they would take no chances with her health or the babies. Florence listened to his enthusiastic planning with amusement and love. This practical, reserved man who had seemed so controlled was now almost babbling with excitement. It showed her yet another side of him, revealed the depth of emotion he usually kept carefully contained. "We need to tell Samuel," Florence said. "He will have questions, but I think he will be excited to be a big brother." "Let me tell him," Yates requested. "I want to make sure he knows that this does not change how I feel about him, that he will always be my son just as much as the new baby." The next morning at breakfast, Yates cleared his throat importantly, and Samuel looked up from his eggs with interest. "Son, your mama and I have something important to tell you." Samuel's eyes went wide. "Am I in trouble?" "No, nothing like that." Yates reached across the table and ruffled Samuel's hair. "This is good news. You are going to be a big brother. Your mama is going to have a baby." Samuel looked confused for a moment, processing this information. "A baby? Like a real baby?" "A real baby," Florence confirmed with a smile. "Sometime next spring you will have a little brother or sister." "Will it be able to play with me?" "Not right away," Yates said. "Babies are very small and cannot do much at first, but as the baby grows, you will be able to teach it things and play with it." Being a big brother is an important job. Samuel thought about this, his small face serious. Then he looked up at Yates with uncertainty in his eyes. "Papa, will you still love me when the new baby comes? I heard Tommy Jenkins say his father only cares about the new baby now." Yates immediately came around the table and knelt beside Samuel's chair, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "Now you listen to me, Samuel. You are my son, and nothing in this world will ever change that. I do not care that you did not come from my blood. You are my boy, and I love you with everything I have. The new baby will not change that. A heart does not run out of love. It just grows bigger to hold it all." Samuel flung his arms around Yates's neck. "I love you too, Papa." Florence watched them with tears in her eyes. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever else happened in their lives, she had made the right choice in coming to Texas, in marrying this good, kind man who loved her son as fiercely as if he were his own flesh and blood. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Florence continued her daily tasks, though Yates insisted she rest more and refused to let her lift anything heavy. Rosa Rodriguez became a frequent visitor, full of advice and old remedies, bringing herbs for tea that would ease Florence's occasional nausea, and making predictions about whether the baby would be a boy or girl based on how Florence was carrying. "A boy," Rosa declared confidently in her 3rd month. "You carry high and forward, definitely a boy. My grandmother taught me these signs and she was never wrong." Yates was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He worried when Florence had a pain, fretted if she seemed tired, and made regular trips to town to consult with the doctor. Florence found his concern both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from a place of deep caring. As winter approached, Yates worked to finish the addition to the house. With Tom's help, he built a new bedroom that would eventually belong to the baby, and he expanded the kitchen to give Florence more space for cooking and preserving food. The house that had seemed so small and sparse when Florence first arrived was now growing and changing, becoming a real family home. Samuel was excited about the coming baby and constantly talked about what they would do together. He collected smooth stones he thought the baby might like and drew pictures that Florence promised to hang in the new nursery. His enthusiasm was infectious, and even Tom, the normally taciturn ranch hand, found himself drawn into discussions about baby names and whether it would be a boy or girl. Christmas came, and Florence decorated the house with pine boughs and candles, creating a festive atmosphere. Rosa and her family came for dinner, along with a few other neighbors from outlying ranches. The house was full of laughter and warmth, so different from the silent Christmases Yates had spent alone in previous years. He stood back at one point, watching Florence move among their guests, and felt his chest tighten with gratitude for the richness she had brought to his life. On Christmas morning, Florence gave Yates a new shirt she had sewn, the stitching fine and even, the fabric a soft blue that matched his eyes. He gave her a music box he had ordered special from San Antonio, its delicate mechanism playing a soft waltz when wound. "It is beautiful," Florence breathed, turning the box over to admire the carved wooden case. "But Yates, it must have cost so much." "You are worth it," he said simply. "I want you to have beautiful things, Florence. You deserve them." She kissed him then, there in front of Samuel and the Christmas tree they had cut and decorated together, a kiss full of love and promise. "What I have is already more beautiful than anything money can buy." The winter was mild by Texas standards, but there were still cold days when the wind howled, and everyone stayed close to the fire. On those days, Florence would bake bread and make stews, filling the house with good smells while Samuel played with his wooden animals, and Yates worked on repairing tack or reading. They were simple domestic scenes, but they held a contentment that Florence had never experienced in her first marriage. With Thomas, she had been young and uncertain, still finding her way. With Yates, she was a full partner, valued and respected. As Florence's pregnancy advanced and her belly grew round, Yates became even more tender with her. He would rest his hand on her stomach in the evenings, feeling the baby move, his face filled with wonder. "Strong kicks," he would say with pride. "This one is going to be a fighter." In February, on a cold but clear day, Rosa came to visit and brought her oldest daughter, Maria, who at 18 was already married and expecting her first child. The two pregnant women compared experiences while Rosa supervised, offering wisdom earned through bearing 6 children of her own. "The pain is terrible but brief," Rosa said matter-of-factly. "And the moment you hold your baby, you forget all about it. Nature is wise that way." Florence appreciated Rosa's bluntness. So many women spoke of childbirth in hushed, frightened tones, but Rosa treated it as the natural, if challenging, process it was. Having Rosa's steady presence as a resource gave Florence confidence as her time grew closer. In early March, Florence woke one morning to a dull ache in her lower back that gradually intensified throughout the day. She said nothing at first, not wanting to alarm Yates unnecessarily, but by afternoon she could no longer hide her discomfort. Yates took one look at her face and immediately sent Tom racing to fetch Rosa. Then he settled Florence in the bedroom, built up the fire, and started heating water, his movements efficient despite his obvious worry. "It is too soon," he said, pacing beside the bed. "You should not deliver for another 3 weeks. Babies come when they are ready, not when we expect them," Florence said, managing a smile despite the intensifying contractions. "I am sure everything will be fine." Rosa arrived within the hour, bringing her daughter Maria and an older woman Florence had not met before, a midwife named Senora Gutierrez, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The 3 women took over with calm efficiency, shooing Yates out of the bedroom and settling in for what promised to be a long night. Yates spent the hours pacing the main room, occasionally stopping to listen at the bedroom door, his face drawn with worry. Tom tried to distract him with conversation, but eventually gave up and just sat quietly, offering silent support. Samuel, frightened by the strange activity and the sounds of his mother's labored breathing, clung to Yates, and that more than anything helped Yates maintain his composure. He could not fall apart when Samuel needed him to be strong. "Is Mama going to be okay?" Samuel asked repeatedly, his small face anxious. "Yes, son. Your Mama is very strong and she has the best help possible. She's going to be just fine, and soon you will have a little brother or sister to meet." As the night wore on, Florence's pains intensified. She gritted her teeth against the urge to cry out, not wanting to frighten Samuel more than necessary. But as the contractions peaked, she could not help the low moans that escaped her. Rosa held one hand while Maria held the other, both women offering encouragement and support. Senora Gutierrez monitored her progress with experienced hands, occasionally offering sips of herbal tea meant to ease the pain and strengthen the contractions. Just before dawn, when the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, Florence gave a final, tremendous push, and the baby slid into Senora Gutierrez's waiting hands. For one heart-stopping moment, there was silence, and then the baby let out a strong, indignant wail that brought tears of relief to every eye in the room. "A boy," Senora Gutierrez announced with satisfaction, quickly cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a soft blanket. Small but healthy with good strong lungs. Florence lay back against the pillows, exhausted but elated as the midwife placed the baby in her arms. He was red-faced and angry, his tiny fists waving, his dark hair plastered to his head. To Florence, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Let me get your husband," Rosa said, already moving toward the door. "He has been going mad with worry." Yates burst into the room moments later, his eyes wild until they found Florence and confirmed she was all right. Then his gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms, and his entire body seemed to sag with relief. "A son," Florence said softly. "We have a son, Yates." He approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might be dreaming. When he finally looked down at the baby, his expression was one of pure awe. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "Absolutely perfect. And you, how are you? Tired, but well." Florence smiled up at him. "Would you like to hold him?" Yates looked uncertain but carefully took the baby when Florence held him out. The infant seemed impossibly small in his large, work-roughened hands, but Yates held him with infinite care, his eyes never leaving the tiny face. "Hello, son," Yates murmured. "I am your papa. I have been waiting for you." The baby's eyes, dark and unfocused, seemed to look in his direction, and Yates let out a shaky laugh. "He looked at me. Did you see that, Florence? He looked right at me." Of course he did. He knows his father's voice already. Samuel appeared in the doorway, having escaped Tom's supervision, his eyes huge as he took in the scene. "Is that the baby? Can I see?" Yates carefully sat on the edge of the bed and angled the baby so Samuel could see him properly. "This is your little brother, Samuel. What do you think?" Samuel stared at the tiny, wrinkled face for a long moment. "He is really small and kind of red." "All babies are small and red at first," Florence assured him. "He will grow and you will be there to help teach him everything. That is the job of a big brother." "What is his name?" Samuel asked. Florence and Yates looked at each other, having discussed this many times without reaching a final decision. "What do you think, Yates? You should choose." Yates thought for a moment, his gaze moving between the baby in his arms and the woman in the bed who had given him everything he had never dared to dream of. "William," he said finally. "William Yates Crawford, we will call him Will. William means resolute protector, and that is what I hope he will be, strong and protective of those he loves." "William," Florence repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect. Hello, Will. Welcome to the world, sweet boy." The women left soon after, satisfied that both mother and baby were doing well. Rosa promised to return the next day with a nourishing soup, and Senora Gutierrez left instructions for Florence's care and recovery. Yates thanked them profusely, pressing money into the midwife's hands despite her protests that it was too much. Once they were alone, Yates climbed into bed beside Florence, careful not to jostle her. She leaned against him, the baby cradled between them while Samuel sat at the foot of the bed, still staring at his new brother with fascination. "We have a family," Yates said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "A real family. Sometimes I have to remind myself that this is real, that you three are really mine." "We are yours," Florence confirmed, tilting her face up to kiss him gently. "Just as you are ours. We belong to each other now for better or worse in sickness and health." "For all our days," Yates added, completing the marriage vows they had spoken what seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than a year. The weeks following Will's birth were exhausting but joyful. The baby was healthy and ate well, growing stronger each day. Florence recovered quickly, aided by Rosa's frequent visits and nourishing meals. Yates was a devoted father, taking over Will's nighttime care when he could so Florence could rest. He would walk the floor with the baby against his shoulder, murmuring to him about the ranch, about the horses, about all the things they would do together when Will was older. Samuel adjusted to his new role as big brother with enthusiasm. He wanted to help with everything, from bathing to diaper changes, and though some of his help was more hindrance than assistance, Florence and Yates encouraged his involvement, knowing it was important for him to feel included. Spring arrived, bringing wildflowers that carpeted the hills in brilliant colors and new calves that made Samuel squeal with delight. The ranch was thriving under Yates's careful management, and he began talking about buying more land, expanding their operation. With Tom as permanent help and the prospect of eventually having his sons work alongside him, Yates allowed himself to dream bigger than he had before. On a warm afternoon in April, when Will was about 6 weeks old and sleeping peacefully in a basket in the shade of the porch, Yates found Florence hanging laundry on the line he had strung behind the house. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I have been thinking," he said. "That sounds dangerous," Florence teased, leaning back against him. "I want to hire a woman from town to come help you a few days a week. Rosa's niece is looking for work, and I thought she could assist with the cleaning and the laundry, give you more time to rest and enjoy the baby." Florence turned in his arms to look at him. "Yates, that is a lovely thought, but we do not need to spend money on that. I am managing fine." "I know you are. You are managing beautifully, but you do not have to do it all alone. Let me provide this for you, Florence. You have given me so much. Let me give this back." Looking into his earnest face, Florence felt her resistance melt. "All right. If it makes you happy, then yes, thank you." "It would make me very happy. I want you to have time to just be a mother, to enjoy our children without being worn down by endless chores." "You are a good man, Yates Crawford," Florence said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "I love you. I do not think I have said that enough, but I do. I love you so much." "I love you too," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone. You have made my life complete in ways I did not even know it was lacking. You and Samuel and Will, you three are everything to me." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the warm spring sunshine while their baby slept nearby, and Samuel's laughter rang out from the barn where he was helping Tom feed the horses. It was a perfect moment, the kind that seems almost too good to be real, crystallized in memory to be treasured forever. As the months passed, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Rosa's niece, Gabriella, came 3 times a week to help, and Florence found she appreciated the assistance more than she had expected. It gave her time to play with Samuel, to sit with Will, and just enjoy him without feeling guilty about the work that was not getting done. It also gave her time to pursue a project she had been considering, making better clothes for the family. With the money from the ranch's success, they could afford good fabric, and Florence took pride in creating shirts for Yates and Samuel that fit perfectly and looked handsome. Will grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled easily and rarely cried. His hair lightened to a brown that was somewhere between Florence's chestnut and Yates's darker shade. His eyes, initially dark like all infants, began to change, taking on a blue-gray color remarkably similar to his father's. Yates was enchanted with every sound, every expression, every tiny milestone. He spent hours playing with Will, making faces to elicit giggles, talking to him constantly as if the baby could understand every word. Samuel, now 5 years old, had become confident and outgoing, his early shyness forgotten. He followed Yates everywhere on the ranch, learning to ride better, helping with simple chores, absorbing everything Yates taught him about ranching and cattle. He was patient with Will, bringing him toys and singing songs to him when he fussed, clearly taking his role as big brother seriously. In July, Yates took Florence and the boys to the Independence Day celebration in Marfa. It was the first time Florence had been to town since Will's birth, and she was surprised by how many people knew who she was. Women she had never met congratulated her on the baby. Men shook Yates's hand and commented on how well he looked, how marriage clearly agreed with him. Reverend and Mrs. Matthews made a fuss over Will, and Mrs. Matthews pulled Florence aside to tell her how happy she was to see the Crawford family thriving. "Yates was such a lonely man before you came," Mrs. Matthews said. "Oh, he never complained, but you could see it in his eyes, that hunger for connection. Now he looks like a man who has found his purpose. You have been good for him, my dear." "He has been good for me too," Florence said. "Better than I ever dared to hope for." The celebration was lively, with music and dancing, food and games. Samuel ran wild with the other children, his face sticky with candy. Will was passed from admiring woman to admiring woman, all cooing over how handsome he was. And Florence danced with Yates under the stars, remembering that night when they had first tentatively moved toward each other, when their marriage had been more hope than reality. "Happy?" Yates asked as they swayed to the music, Will asleep against her shoulder and Samuel visible in the crowd of playing children. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Florence answered honestly. "A year and a half ago I was desperate and frightened, with no idea what kind of life I was walking into. Now I have everything I could possibly want." "So do I," Yates said, pulling her closer. "You are my heart, Florence Crawford, you and our boys. As long as I have you three, I have everything." As autumn arrived and the air began to cool, Yates made plans for a cattle drive to take a portion of his herd to market. It would be his first extended absence from the family, and both he and Florence approached it with mixed feelings. The money from the sale was necessary, but neither liked the idea of being apart for the 3 weeks the trip would require. "I could hire someone else to take the herd," Yates offered the night before he was scheduled to leave. "Tom could manage it with a few extra hands." "We need you to go," Florence said practically. "You will get better prices than anyone else because you know the cattle and you know how to negotiate. We will be fine here, Yates. Rosa is nearby if I need anything, and Gabriella comes regularly. It is only 3 weeks." "3 weeks feels like an eternity," Yates muttered, but he knew she was right. In the morning, he kissed them all goodbye, holding each one a little longer than necessary, then rode out with Tom and 2 hired hands, driving 60 head of cattle toward the rail station at Abilene. The house felt empty without Yates's presence. Florence had grown so accustomed to having him there, to the sound of his voice and his footsteps, that his absence was like a physical ache. Samuel was subdued, missing his father, and even Will seemed to sense something was wrong, fussing more than usual. But they managed. Florence kept them busy with projects and outings to the creek. Rosa visited almost daily, bringing food and company. The days passed, and Florence counted them off on the calendar, marking each one until Yates's expected return. On the 18th day, Florence woke from sleep in the deep hours of night, certain she had heard something. She lay still, listening, and then it came again, the unmistakable sound of a horse approaching the house. Her heart began to pound. It was too late for a casual visitor, and Yates was not due back for several more days. She rose quickly, checking on the boys, who were both sleeping soundly, Samuel in his room and Will in his cradle beside her bed. Moving quietly, Florence went to the window and peeked through the curtain. In the moonlight, she could see a rider approaching, and then relief flooded through her. She recognized the horse, the set of the man's shoulders. Yates. She hurried to the door and opened it as he was dismounting, and he strode across the yard and caught her up in his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You are home early," she managed when he finally released her enough that she could speak. "We got good prices and finished the business faster than expected. I could not stand to be away from you any longer." He cupped her face and kissed her deeply. "God, I missed you. I missed all of you." 3 weeks felt like 3 years. "I missed you too." Florence pulled him into the house. "Come see the boys. They are sleeping, but I know they will be so excited to see you in the morning." Yates crept into Samuel's room first, standing over the sleeping child and gently brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I missed you, son," he whispered. Then they moved to the bedroom, where Will lay sleeping in his cradle. Yates knelt beside it, his large hand covering the baby's entire chest. "Look how much he has grown in just 3 weeks. He is getting so big." "Babies do that," Florence said fondly. "Now come to bed, you must be exhausted." They lay together in the darkness, Yates holding Florence as if he would never let her go. "I did a lot of thinking on the drive," he said quietly, "about what matters, what is important, and I realized that this right here is everything. This ranch, it is just a place. The money we make, it is just paper, but you three, you are my life. You are what gives everything else meaning." "We feel the same way about you," Florence assured him. "You are the center of our world, Yates. Everything is different when you are here." "Then I am never leaving for that long again. From now on, Tom can take the cattle to market. My place is here with my family." Florence did not argue. She simply held him close and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for this life they had built together, for this unexpected love that had grown from such practical beginnings. As the years passed, their family continued to thrive. When Will was 2, Florence found herself pregnant again, and in early spring of 1885, she delivered a daughter they named Abigail after Yates's mother. Abigail had Florence's coloring and Yates's eyes, and she was doted upon by her father and brothers alike. Samuel grew into a responsible, capable young man, as comfortable on horseback as his father, with a natural way with cattle that suggested he would make a fine rancher one day. Will was rambunctious and curious, always getting into mischief, but with such charm that he rarely got into serious trouble. And Abigail, even as a small child, showed signs of being determined and independent, keeping her older brothers in line with an imperious manner that made both Florence and Yates laugh. The ranch expanded over the years. Yates bought adjacent land when it became available, eventually owning over 1,000 acres. He built a new barn and added another room onto the house, giving Abigail her own space as she grew older. The Circle C became known as one of the most successful ranches in the area, due in no small part to Florence's management of the household finances and her skill at negotiating with buyers when Yates was occupied with ranch work. They had challenges, of course. There were droughts that tested their resources, cattle sicknesses that decimated part of their herd, and the normal trials that come with raising children and running a business. But they faced everything together, their partnership strengthened by years of mutual respect and deepening love. On a warm evening in the summer of 1890, Florence sat on the porch she had come to love, watching the sun set over the land that had become home. Samuel was 19 now, tall and strong, working alongside Yates with the easy competence of a born rancher. Will, at 7, was chasing Abigail, age 5, around the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Yates emerged from the barn and crossed the yard to join her, settling into the chair beside hers with a satisfied sigh. His hair was now streaked with gray at the temples, and there were more lines on his face than when they had first met, but to Florence, he had only become more handsome with age. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, taking her hand and threading his fingers through hers in the gesture that had become second nature over the years. "How far we have come," Florence said. "How different my life is from what I thought it would be that day I stepped off the stagecoach in Marfa, so scared and uncertain." "I remember that day so clearly," Yates said. "Seeing you standing there with Samuel, thinking you were the prettiest woman I had ever seen, and then being terrified you would take one look at me and get right back on that stage." Florence laughed. "I was too desperate to be that particular. But I am so grateful now for that desperation, for the circumstances that brought me here. If my life had been easier, if I had not been forced to make such a drastic choice, I might never have found this. We were both lucky," Yates said. "Two lonely people who found each other just when we needed it most. I look at our life now, at our children, at this ranch we have built together, and I can hardly believe my good fortune." Samuel approached the porch, leading his horse. "I am going to ride out and check the north fence line," he called. "Tom said he thought he saw some damage earlier." "Be back before dark," Yates called back, every inch the concerned father despite Samuel's capable age. "I will," Samuel assured him, then rode off with a wave. "He is a good boy," Florence observed. "You have taught him well." "We have taught him well," Yates corrected. "Everything good about our children comes as much from you as from me. You have been the heart of this family, Florence. You have made this house a home filled with love and laughter. You have loved my son as I love yours, and together we have built something beautiful." "I love you," Florence said, the words coming easily after years of practice. "I love you more now than I did when we married, more than I thought it was possible to love someone. You have been my partner, my friend, my lover, and the best father my children could have asked for." "And I love you," Yates replied, pulling her close. "You walked into my life when I had given up on finding happiness, and you gave me not just one reason to smile, but a whole lifetime of them. Every day with you is a gift I never take for granted." They sat together as the light faded, and the stars began to emerge, their children's voices a comforting soundtrack, their joined hands a symbol of all they had built together. The story that had begun with a desperate woman and a lonely cowboy had become a romance that defied expectations, a love that grew deeper with every passing year, a family that was proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely circumstances. When Will finally caught Abigail and brought her to the porch, claiming she had cheated in their game, Florence gathered her daughter onto her lap while Yates pulled Will close. They sat there as a family, watching the night settle over the land that belonged to them, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. Years later, when Samuel married and brought his own wife to live on the ranch, building a house nearby, Florence and Yates would become grandparents, delighting in the next generation. When Will went east to study at university, before returning to take over the breeding program for the ranch, they would support his ambitions. When Abigail grew into a beautiful young woman who chose to become a teacher rather than marry young, they would encourage her independence. Through it all, Florence and Yates would remain the bedrock of the family, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. They would grow old together, their bodies slowing but their devotion never wavering. They would sit on that same porch decades later, hands still intertwined, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played, grateful for every moment of the life they had built from a mail-order marriage that had bloomed into the deepest love either of them had ever known. And on quiet evenings, Yates would still turn to Florence and repeat the words that had become their private refrain, the acknowledgement of the gift she had given him that day in June of 1882, when she stepped off the stagecoach with a child in her arms. "You gave me 2 reasons to smile that day," he would say, "and you have been giving me reasons to smile every day since. I am the luckiest man who ever lived, Florence Crawford." And Florence, her hair now white and her face lined with the marks of a life well lived, would smile and reply, "No, my love, I am the lucky one. You took us in when we had nothing. You loved us when we needed it most. You built us a home and a family and a life I had never dared to dream of." The luck was all mine. But the truth, which they both knew, was that the luck had been shared equally. Two people, both lonely in their own ways, both seeking something they had almost given up on finding, had taken a chance on each other and discovered that love could grow even in the harsh Texas soil, watered by patience and respect, and nourished by daily acts of kindness and care. Their story became part of local legend, the mail-order bride and the lonely cowboy who built one of the most successful ranches in West Texas through hard work and partnership. But to Florence and Yates, it was never about the ranch or the success. It was about family, about love, about the simple miracle of finding the right person at exactly the right time. And every year on the anniversary of that June day when Florence had arrived in Marfa, they would hitch up the wagon and drive into town, retracing that first journey to the ranch. They would stop at the spot where Yates had first told Samuel about the horses, where he had first smiled, and said he now had 2 reasons to be happy. And they would remember the beginning of everything good in their lives, grateful beyond measure for the courage that had brought them together and the love that had kept them that way. The end.